Under his guiding hand, the Second Corps, composed of some of the most colorful units and personalities in the Army of Northern Virginia, and under their famous chieftain Robert E. Lee, led to battlefield victory at places like Second Manassas, where at times they resorted to throwing rocks at the advancing Union Army. They fought to a stalemate and a bloody bludgeoning along Sharpsburg, a savage fight at Fredericksburg along what is now Prospect Hill, and then, of course, one of their heydays, the daring flank march at Chancellorsville in May of '63. As we know, Jackson fell in the woods along the Plank Road, felled by volleys believed from the 18th North Carolina, mistaking Jackson as cavalcade in the dark woods as Union cavalry. In the reorganization that followed, the gentleman in the center, Richard Stoddard Ewell, came back from command. He took over the Second Corps. A.P. Hill, promoted, would take over the Third. Ewell was actually born in a suburb of our nation's capital, Georgetown, but we better know him from where he grew up in Prince William County, Virginia. He was a West Point trained officer, of course raised command quickly until along Groveton, before the Battle of Second Manassas, a bullet caused the amputation of his leg, and he was out from command for approximately a year. He would command, of course, the Second Corps up through the summer of '63, his heydays at Winchester. Somewhere around this part of Gettysburg, he had a little issue with two words, if practicable, on July 2nd. He did not take Culp's Hill. That's a story for another day. But in the winter of '63, he had an uneven performance and an uneven relationship with his soldiers. A gentleman named Randolph McKim, who served as a staff officer and soon to be actually Reverend for the Second Corps, wrote the following in his diary about Richard Ewell. From a military point of view, this is after Ewell was married, the addition of the wife did not compensate for the loss of the leg. We were of the opinion that Ewell was not the same soldier he had been when he was a whole man or a single one. But Ewell had 3 division commanders under him that was of high quality to start the 1864 Valley campaign. Jubal Early, the irascible gentleman who later on take command of the Second Corps, he was supposedly the only man that had the privilege to cuss in front of Robert E. Lee. He, of course, went to West Point, where he got in an altercation with another Confederate general who fell here on July 3rd, Lewis Armistead, which carried into the mess hall. And Lewis Armistead felt so unnerved by Jubal Early's comments that he broke a plate over Early's head. That earned Armistead his dismissal from West Point. Second guy was Robert Rhodes from Lynchburg, VMI, risen through command to a division. And then last one was the confirmed old bachelor, Edward Allegheny Johnson. More importantly, were the men that you see, these are some of the Louisiana soldiers depicted in the picture there. The Second Corps comprised units from Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Maryland, North and South Carolina, and Virginia. One veteran described later on what a typical Confederate soldier would look like. He said they were a face browned by exposure and heavily bearded, begrimed with dust and sweat, marked here and there with the darker stains of powder, a frame tough and sinewy and trained by hardship to surprising powers of endurance. Above this, an old wool hat, worn and weather-beaten, over a soiled shirt which is unbuttoned and buttonless at the collar. A ragged jacket probably does not reach the hips, with sleeves inches too short. Below this was trousers of a nondescript color, without foam and almost void, and are held in place by a leather belt to which attached is the cartridge box and the bayonet scabbard. Dirty socks disappear in a pair of badly used and curiously contorted shoes. That's the rank and file of the Army of Northern Virginia, the Second Corps. In the spring of '64, though, hopes are up. It revived after the bloodletting of the summer. They're still along where they had started the previous year, along the banks of the Rappahannock and Rapidan, the so-called DMZ, if you want, of the Eastern Theater. The commander of the 2nd Virginia Regiment, part of the Second Corps, was Colonel William Randolph. He put the coming season saying that the sweet, bright days are gone, and now the stern works of war is about to begin. What would they entail on May 5th would be 339 straight days where they would either meet the enemy, march toward the enemy, or be dug in trying to defend a certain spot. But they had some of the best soldiers, the Second Corps did. They had the Stonewall Brigade, which hailed mostly from farms and rural areas in the Shenandoah Valley. But these men marched in the same corps as a group of Louisianans that were far removed from the bucolic settings of the Shenandoah. Initially known as the Tigers, these tumble set of wharf rats, shipmates, never-do-goods, and dockhands in the city of New Orleans initially went off the war under the command of a 6'5" soldier of fortune named Chatham Roberto Wheat. Unfortunately, Wheat attracted a bullet at Gaines Mill in '62 and was killed, and some of his soldiers started walking off the battlefield. When they asked them why, they said, well, they killed old Wheat and I'm done too. And so, but they did come back, and afterwards the name Louisiana Tigers incorporated the 5th through 9th Louisiana regiments. The Tigers, though, had been roughed up in late '63. 600 had been captured along the Rappahannock, but most of them had been exchanged, and of course they're bullying for a fight in early May. Their division commander, Jubal Early, knew he could count on these Pelican State representatives. Early in the war, watching a great charge by Louisianans, Early, known for his profanity, stood up and said with his Tigers as they rolled back the Union line, "Them damn Louisiana fellows may steal as much as they please now." And they did. Steady brigade commanders graced the other proud units of the 2nd Corps. Some of them would rise to prominence in '64. Stephen Dodson Ramseur or Cullen Battle. Others were shot down before their prime or before their star fully shone. Guys like Junius Daniel or George Doles. So, why the 2nd Corps? Early offensive prowess, the overland campaign, and then the pivotal 1864 campaigns. And also, why the 2nd Corps is the route of the common soldier, the spirit of the Corps, and also the role of 1864, the soldiers there. Those are some of the soldiers in the picture to the right that fell along action around Harris Farm, part of the Spotsylvania campaign. Photographers taking pictures after the May 18th, 1864. So on May 5th, the Confederate Army, Northern Virginia, of course, will head toward rendezvous with the U.S. Grant and George Meade-led Army of the Potomac. This is what is in each division. Of course, the Corps Artillery and Staff. So 18,919 men comprised the 2nd Corps on May 5th, which is remarkable because as the wars came on, of course, divisions would have somewhere between 3 to 4 brigades. Brigades at the beginning of the war would try to have 4 to 5 regiments, so each regiment tried to have about 1,000 men. So that's, say, 4,000 a brigade, somewhere between supposedly 12 to 16,000 a division in 1861. Now, most of them never reached the 1,000-man capacity because as soon as they reached the front, they would, of course, have sickness or other health or other desertions. And so these divisions are serving about half strength or 1/4 strength. The command there's Richard Ewell, and then, of course, the 3 division commanders under him. Oh. This is May 5th, 1864. The Confederate Army under Ewell will approach towards you on the screen. This is Saunders Field looking out from where the 5th Corps, elements under Charles Griffin's division, would fight. Ewell's Corps would comprise kind of the crest in the far distance there. Ewell, coming up, was asked if he had any issues with the orders. Of course, stemming probably from his time here at Gettysburg, some of the soldiers wondered if the orders, if practicable, might be issued again. Ewell, though, answered that to a staff officer that he had no objections of the orders he received on the morning of May 5th. He said, "No, sir, none at all. What he had received from the commander is just the orders I like, to go right down the turnpike and strike the enemy wherever I found them." The fighting that erupted in this expansive 2nd and 3rd growth wilderness showed the prowess of the Confederates of the 2nd Corps and what they still possessed. Fighting behind entrenchments, similar to the ones there's taken after the battle, and coming out with brief soirees, this Ewell turns back to Union Corps, the 5th under Gouverneur Warren and the 6th under John Sedgwick. Of course, once again, Ewell procrastinates, giving his opinion on whether a young gentleman named John Brown Gordon should launch a flank attack late on the 6th. John Brown Gordon is a great individual, and I definitely recommend reading his reminiscences because he did everything in the Civil War, from fight at the Bloody Lane to attack at the Battle of the Bulge. He also was in Moscow. So a great gentleman who wrote extensively about what he did during the war. Summed up, though, by one of the rank and file in the 2nd Corps, the officer in the famous Louisiana Brigade, he said, "Our brigade got into the thickest of it. One could not tell whether, though, he was talking about the combat or the terrain. This was a soldier's fight. This is time where you lost the gentleman to your left, the gentleman to your right as soon as you entered the thickets. Some places," he said, "dogs couldn't even get through. But the men fought. At night, though, the smoke, the carnage, the screams, the yells, the smell would get to these soldiers. And as he laid out there, friend fell. One of the gentlemen laying out there between the lines happened to be an ancestor of mine. His comrades had left him there. He was wounded through the left leg. He ended up having the leg amputated and dying from it. But laying out there all night, and sometimes I wonder and imagine what he thought laying out there, hearing the cartridge boxes of some of his comrades starting to explode as the fire came closer. Beginning in the wilderness, the attrition of frontline officers began. At the end of the overland campaign, if you take it as they crossed the James River, 30 of 41 men who commanded brigades in Lee's army would be killed, wounded, or captured in this overland campaign. Now, this is including men who replaced other ones, but few of them started to fall here. John M. Jones, commanding a Virginia brigade along the turnpike. A nephew of Jubal Early also fell. Leroy Stafford, in charge of the Louisiana Tigers, was mortally wounded when a rifle ball shattered his spinal cord. 10,000 Confederate soldiers fell approximately in the wilderness. One of the survivors, though, said, "I think we are certain to whip them. Our fight and our men are very determined." Spotsylvania courthouse would test that determination. This is looking out toward where the Second Corps would line up. Due to the natural terrain, the Second Corps was placed in a mule shoe orientation, which gave some of these veteran soldiers a moment to pause. One quipped very honestly, "I did not like it at all," was how a Louisiana soldier reminisced about his time in the mule shoe. Ewell promised to Lee, though, he could hold this ground as long as artillery support was given. But unfortunately, due to an airness report, artillery is pulled out late on the night of May 11th, believing the Union Army is retreating. It is then pulled back in, but too late to serve, because in the pre-dawn hours at 4:30 in the morning, 54,000 Union soldiers come screaming directly toward the far end of this picture. They slam into the groggy Confederate defenders. What makes it worse is that some of these Confederate defenders, Stewart's brigade, Johnson's division, they level their rifles across the top of the parapet and they go to pull the trigger. Nothing happens. Their powder's wet. These men are starting to suffer battle fatigue. They'd fought 1 week of straight combat. They'd marched from May 5th starting all the way down to May 12th. They're in trenches. They're not eating well. It's raining. They're starting to develop some dulled senses. If you try existing on hardtack and water for a week, having constant threat. So these men forget to check the powder on May 11th and the May 12th, and it's wet. Well, of course, Union soldiers love this because no one's shooting at them. So they charge in, and it starts 17 hours of straight combat here along the Bloody Angle. One soldier said, "Lastly, I never expect to be fully believed when I tell what I saw of the horrors of Spotsylvania, because I would be loath to believe it myself if the case was reversed." One soldier said you could almost see the ground moving, 7, 8 rows deep of men killed and wounded, wiggling the wounded, trying to get out. One soldier, watching a comrade get killed, was so upset and frustrated that with his adrenaline pumping, he took a 10-pound musket or rifle with a bayonet and threw it like a spear, caught an antagonist in the chest, pinning him to the ground and putting the bayonet 4 inches through his sternum. One of the soldiers, after fighting 17 hours, laid down to go to sleep. He had his head on one body's feet on the other. He didn't realize that the Confederates started to evacuate. He didn't realize it till one of the line officers said, "All clear." He then startled, he said in his own words, he jumped up, looked around, had his rifle ready to fight, and realized he's in the middle of 2 lines. And he starts to hear a little bit of snickering. That's his comrades seeing his confusion in between the lines. As it happens, along here, the division of Edward Johnson almost ceases to exist. 3,500 men, out of what I showed you, the 7,000 that had started, are captured, killed, or wounded here. One soldier said here was nothing of glamour but unmitigated slaughter. A 22-inch oak tree cut completely in half by small arms fire. 15,000 Confederate soldiers tried to defend the mule shoe. One historian broke down the figures of the death and dying in the mule shoe. He said that out of 17 hours of combat, 818 men per hour, or 4 men every second, or 8 men by the time I finished this sentence would have been killed, wounded, or captured on May 12, 1864. 9,000 of 15,000 Confederates would become casualties. The Second Corps would become drastically changed because of Spotsylvania. And to show proof, this is where George Maryland Stewart, a brigade commander in the Army of Northern Virginia, was captured. The reason this picture is included is because me and Stuart, years apart, were born almost in the exact same area of Baltimore City. So some believe that I may have the same attitude as Stuart, because when Stuart was captured, he was taken back to Hancock's headquarters. Hancock offered his hand, and as a true Baltimorean, he said, "On this present circumstances, I cannot shake it." Hancock is a little offended. Hancock says, "Under any other circumstances, I wouldn't have offered my damn hand." And so Stuart gets to march the 12 miles back to Fredericksburg, while Johnson is a little more polite, gets to ride in a wagon. But like a true Baltimorean. So the Second Corps, now Ewell will survive the mule shoe, though he starts to lose his composure. He'll survive a debacle at Harris Farm and along the action of North Anna, but he is replaced at the end of May by Jubal Anderson Early. At the same time, the division commands will change a little. John Gordon, Stephen Ramseur, and Robert Rhodes are promoted to command. And so, all day around places at Cold Harbor, and this action with entrenches to the left and the field to your right is where the Ewell down Early's Corps had lined up. So Cold Harbor would add laurels. Now, at Cold Harbor, the Second Corps would show a little bit of their offensive spirit still. They would attack at a place like Bethesda Church. They would hang in the entrenchments. Cold Harbor, another bloodbath. Soldiers, reminiscing afterwards, would try to omit Cold Harbor from their collective memory. It was the end. 30 straight days, May 5th to June 5th, the armies were in constant contact. If you take the control of the 64 campaign, they had fought more days in 1 month in 1864 than they had fought the entire 1863 campaign season in pitched battle. The war, though, was just beginning because, as Grant said, there was no turning back. But after Cold Harbor, the Confederates have a little bit of a disaster. Where they had most of their success was the Shenandoah Valley. But after the Battle of Newmarket, John Breckinridge will bring soldiers east to fight in the Battle of Cold Harbor, including bringing some of the Maryland soldiers that had once served and fought so gallantly here at Culp's Hill. But the problem is they did not realize that the Union would reconstitute a force so quickly. And David Hunter would continue up the valley. If you've ever been to the Shenandoah Valley, because of how the rivers work, if you're going south on I-81 today, you're actually going up the valley. If you're going down the valley, that means you're traveling north on I-81. So it's really confusing if you stop at a gas station and ask which way is up the valley, because directions are different. But like the secrecy, though, of Old Blue Light, the rank and file of the Second Corps would leave the entrenchments around Richmond and Petersburg shortly after the Battle of Cold Harbor. One soldier said, unknown to where we were going, we started at 2 a.m., maybe reminiscing about the times that old Jack would lead them on in March, where you had no idea. Even the buttons on Jackson's jacket sometimes supposedly didn't know where they were going. After a few mile march, the men of the Second Corps started to get an inkling of where they were headed. The Shenandoah Valley. One soldier described it, we're marching 18 to 20 miles a day, but they arrive in Charlottesville. And there they get some of the delicacies that is missing along the lines of Richmond and Petersburg. One soldier remarks that they get cakes and other delicacies and also offer tobacco, but he assures his mother that, you know, I don't do any of that. The route takes them into the valley. Lynchburg was crucial to the Confederates' war effort, and David Hunter was approaching it. Lynchburg is situated approximately 110 miles from the state capital, Richmond. The city, though, is a linchpin between farms and city and a cog in the transportation network. 3 railroads ran through the town. The James River and Kanawha Canal also connected Lynchburg and Richmond. Convalescing in the hospitals there was over 10,000 Confederate soldiers. This rail link could not be severed. This town of Lynchburg needed to be saved. And Jubal Anderson Early and the Second Corps were the men to do it. So as the Confederates sidled into the entrenchments around Lynchburg and worked to strengthen them, a rank and file member casually wrote home that they were, in quotes, on a hunting expedition, using David Hunter's name, and expect to bag the game inside of 3 days. David Hunter, though, had been delayed approaching Lynchburg, stopping in Stoughton, according to Jubal Early, to, in quotes, indulge in petty acts of malignity and outrage upon private citizens. He said this was, in quotes, more congenial to his nature than bold field operations. No one ever accused Jubal Early of sugarcoating his viewpoints. David Hunter, ironically, talking about the brother versus brother war, happened to be an uncle to Confederate General George Stewart, who had been captured at Spotsylvania. Slowing his approach was the rebel cavalry under John McCausland. But by June 10th, now June 5th, 6th, 7th, of course, the Confederate Army, Early still in around Cold Harbor, headed west. Hunter was 10 miles from Lexington, where he does burn VMI. Luckily, though, Hunter, toward the Confederacy, had spent 24 hours wasting time there. And so by the time he arrived, they said Confederate reinforcements were starting to stream into the city. First was John Breckinridge. One civilian in the Virginia town said, in quotes, "It was a reassuring sight, and never was a lot of bronzed and dirty-looking veterans, many of them barefooted, more heartily welcomed than they were in Lynchburg on June 10th. The Confederates may have been outnumbered, though, in rank and file, but luckily for us, they could match the invading Union forces in generals. Besides McCausland and Bowdoin, you had Vaughn there in charge of Confederate cavalry. Breckinridge was sent. Other generals convalescing, Daniel Harvey Hill and Harry Thompson Hayes, were both in the city. So let's add Early and a few more generals, because where you need more generals is where you need more generals. Meanwhile, Early's Second Corps was coming to the rescue. The sort of homecoming for Early, he was a native of Franklin County. After the war, he would call Lynchburg home. He sent a message on June 16th to 64 to Breckinridge and the city defenders. Hold out for 24 hours and all will be well. But then he covers his own self. He says, unless the railroads fail. All would be well, though. The Confederate Army will slink in. They will slink in along the lines. They will march through the dust and the humidity of June. Now, I had written a note here saying that just like the weather we're having outside, but not anymore, luckily. And so on June 17th, Hunters advanced the city. They came in contact with two brigades from Stephen Ramseur's division. Early descriptively put it that Hunter now faced, in quotes, no buttermilk Rangers are after you now. And so was the Second Corps. That night at Sandusky, Hunter will use as his headquarters, receives a startling report that the town of Lynchburg had been reinforced. Hunter quickly saddled up, took into a ride to inspect, and sure enough, he could hear Confederate troops improving defenses around Lynchburg. These are some of the heights in the town looking down toward the river there. When June 18th dawned, the numbers would be equal. But also on June 18th, don't worry, the Confederates are going to send more general officers to Lynchburg. Major Generals Arnold Elzey and Robert Ransom arrived from the Confederate capital. So now you almost have a who's who of Confederate generals. They assumed command. Hunter, still not convinced that Lee had sent reinforcements, tried to advance. Some minor actions happen. And as one Confederate soldier says, Hunter will escape into the foothills of what is now West Virginia, leaving the Confederates in control of the valley. As one soldier of the rebel army said, the Union in that branch of tactics usually generally excelled us in retreating than we did. The importance of the Battle of Lynchburg cannot be attributed to the heavy fighting, which was light, but it was what happened after the Battle of Lynchburg. Not only did Lee now see the necessity of holding on the valley, he saw an opportunity to take the war north. And Lee saw an opportunity to try to change the game with one last great gamble. So with Hunter off into the woods, Grant fighting Lee here, the valley was open up the middle. And as we know, Lee liked to use the valley. 62, Jackson's campaign. 63, he used the valley to get into the north. That's exactly under Early. He has a general capable of doing that. So the Army of Northern Virginia's Second Corps will start going down the valley and pop out the valley in western Maryland. And their goal is to get to D.C., to cause a disruption, to upset plans. Here it is, June, early July of 1864. The Union and Confederate armies had suffered 85,000 casualties in the overland campaign combined. Meanwhile, in Georgia, Sherman's hammering Johnston. Lincoln's up for re-election in a few months. But if Early can threaten D.C., or Early's north of the Potomac River, what are you going to tell the voters? Is the war progressing? Casualties are mounting, but here's the Confederate Army in Western Maryland once again, the third time in 3 years. But luckily, along the banks of the Monocacy River, a gentleman named Lew Wallace, who now had good maps, unlike he did at Shiloh where he took the wrong road, he arrives and it prolongs the day on July 9th, the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia along the banks of the Monocacy and slows them up. He slows them up a day until they reach Fort Stevens, which you see down to the right. And where the picture is taken is exactly where the marker is where President Lincoln supposedly stood on July 12th. Early, though, is a day late by the time he arrives in D.C. because along those lines, spreading out, is the Union 6th Corps. Early, taking a brief synopsis of the line, says, yeah, the troops are lining the embankments. The fort to his immediate front was bustling with Yankees. His army had conducted long marches, a pitched battle 2 days previous, and another forced march to Washington. The men were simply exhausted. Imagine, June 5th, you're in Richmond. By July 12th, you're in D.C., but you're not taking I-95. You're going all the way around the valley and up through. But on the way back, early, marching his men back out through Rockville, up toward the crossings of the Potomac, turns to one of his staff officers and says, Major, we haven't taken Washington, but we scared old Abe like hell. The Union Army, General Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln, the War Cabinet, scrambled to make sure that no Confederates, including Early, would ever scare Washington, D.C. or any political leader like hell again. And so who do they bring to fight? In the summer of 64, they bring out a gentleman named Philip Sheridan. Sheridan, besides having a great first name of Philip, sometimes one of his soldiers said he is a very strong-willed, determined leader, sometimes bordering on, one soldier said, stupidity, because he doesn't know exactly when he's defeated, but he hangs on and he wins in the end. And so, with the understandably with the presidential election, they can't lose here in the valley. Before they decided on Sheridan, though, here's a list of names that Grant sent to Lincoln to consider for this posting in the valley. See who he was angling for here. He said you could choose Major General William Franklin. You could choose Major General George McClellan. You could use Major General George Meade or Major General Philip Sheridan. Sheridan was the one Lincoln selected. Would have been interesting, though, if he selected his antagonist in the 1864 election to go serve in the field. But he chooses Sheridan, and in 1864, the Valley Campaign, after actions at places like Rutherford Farm or Cool Springs, which unfortunately has started to be swallowed up now by the urban growth of the Winchester area, the Confederates will fight again at a place in Winchester. Winchester supposedly was fought over 72 to 82 times during the war. On September 19th, the Union Army will come through on Winchester. Philip Sheridan will bring them down what is now present-day Route 7, the Berryville Canyon, the Berryville Turnpike. They slam into the Confederates there, and they start to fight the Battle of Third Winchester. The Confederates will start to slowly fall back in Winchester. Stephen Ramseur's division is depicted here in some of the sketches done after. Sheridan's men will start to pull out. This battle gets heated. Robert Rhodes will fall here, a beloved commander. Another gentleman, interestingly, that falls here is a guy named Archibald Godwin, a brigadier general. After the war, the Union is looking for Archibald Godwin because he was a commandant of a Confederate prisoner of war and had abused some Union prisoners. So they can't find Archibald Godwin anywhere. They don't know if he's paroled. They don't know if he's hiding in the hills. So they finally resort to asking every Confederate veteran they can. One of them says, you can keep looking, but you already got him. You killed him at 3rd Winchester in September 64. The Union soldier said, well, I guess we can't hang him then. So the Union Army will advance 3rd Winchester. They'll push the Confederate Army back through the town. They push them out the other side because the Confederates Early doesn't have the forces available. This is the view here of Sheridan's headquarters today. So it changed a little bit in 150 some years. Across the way is where the action will happen. The turnpike is running from your right to your left. And so, as they push them back through, the Confederates will retreat through the town of Winchester. the town of Winchester will go dark, literally, because the gas works is hit. And so the lights go out. And one of the forts around Winchester is Fort Collier, where a young gentleman named George Patton will be mortally wounded. He's the grandfather of the one more famous George Patton. Jubal Early gambled, tried to bring the infantry from his left flank. The cavalry overran. One of them would get a Medal of Honor there along the Star Fort in 1864. They'd push them back through the town to a place called Fisher's Hill. They would be pushed a few days later off Fisher's Hill. The Confederates have been pushed back through the valley. The Second Corps is struggling. The Second Corps, on no fault of Early, has to be 100% perfect because they are outnumbered 3-1. Unfortunately, they have Philip Sheridan to deal with. They're not dealing with, no offense to Nathaniel Prentice Banks, John Fremont, James Shields, or anyone else. So, as they push back, the Confederates will retreat back through Belle Grove. They'll retreat back down the Shenandoah Valley, and this is where the cavalry will respond in October at a place called Tom's Brook. They fall back through, losing, of course, they've lost division commanders. They fall back, and here's some of the division commanders that would fall in command of the Second Corps. They fell back into almost out of the valley themselves. And as they do, the order for Sheridan after he pushes the Confederate Army out of Fisher's Hill is that Grant wanted him to destroy the breadbasket of the Confederacy. He wanted them to destroy the valley. He said he wanted a crow to have to carry its own provender flying over the valley. And so that's exactly what Sheridan's troops do. After they were gone, a survey is taken out by the Register and Advertiser of Rockingham County, Virginia, and not taking into account personal belongings or miscellaneous outbuildings. This is how effective Sheridan's troops are at destroying the capability of the valley to produce anything for the war effort. 30 dwellings were accidentally destroyed, but they burnt 450 barns in one county. They destroyed 100 miles of fencing. They destroyed 31 mills, 3 factories, and 1 furnace. In addition, 1,750 head of cattle disappeared after Sheridan. 1,750 horses also were gone. 4,200 sheep were missing. 3,350 hogs gone. 100,000 bushels of wheat destroyed. 50,000 bushels of corn disappeared. 6,332 tons of hay. That is one county in the Shenandoah and what Sheridan's men did in late September and early October. One soldier watching from the mountain range said, "Our hearts ached at the horrible sight. Our beautiful valley was almost a barren waste, and we with an army so inferior in numbers as to render success almost hopeless. Yet the sight carried unseen power to avenge this dastardly warfare, making us doubly equal to such an enemy." And so the Confederates, suffering from the destruction of their homeland, marched north or down the valley. Tom's Brook, though, the cavalry ran into the Union cavalry and was beaten back. But the Confederates had one chance left, and they had one chance along the banks of a place called Cedar Creek. And so, as the two sides line up in early October, Sheridan receives a telegram from the Secretary of War, and he leaves. He heads to D.C. for a meeting. He leaves the 6th Corps commander, Major General Horatio Wright, in charge. But as if he's needing any urging from Robert E. Lee, Early was putting the initial plans in motion for an attack. He was setting up a characteristic flanking movement. Lee believed that if Early could use his entire army, victory can be accomplished. That was all Early needed to advance his plans. So along with a gentleman maybe familiar to you named Jedediah Hotchkiss, the Army's topographical engineer, Early, Clement Evans, Gordon, other ones, noticed that they could scale the Macedon mountain range known as the Three Sisters. And so Gordon, ever one for drama, said from up there he could distinctly see the 3 colors and trimmings of the jackets of infantry, artillery, and cavalry. He could locate each. With this opportunity, Gordon dramatically exposed that it required no transcendent military genius to decide on the course of action the Confederates could take. Along this time, a message races up the valley. a message races up to one of those division commanders, Stephen Dodson Ramseur. His wife had given birth to a child. He was a father. And in time of war, the message got lost, whether his young child was a boy or girl. He finished writing the letter. According to a fellow officer, he was very ecstatic, but he hurried off to a meeting. He hurried off to the meeting to plan the Battle of Cedar Creek. So under the cover of darkness, on October 18th, Confederate soldiers began assembling and shuffling to their assigned positions in the battle plan. One officer remembered the night as cloudy and cold. Gordon's men were positioned by 3 a.m. They got across the creek. And, as one Vermont soldier said, as the attack unfolded, everyone in the Union Army wondered where all these Confederate soldiers had come from. They pushed back. They pushed back the Union Army. Here's the victory the Second Corps is supposed to deliver for Robert E. Lee, deliver for the Confederacy. The Confederate Army is pushing the Union back out to Belle Grove, through Middletown. They're pushing them miles and miles. As they do, though, the Confederate soldiers are marching through, they're fighting through, and they're going right through the camps of the Union soldiers. But then some of them start to stop because the Union soldiers have been cooking breakfast. The Confederates were hungry. And as Napoleon says, an army marches on its stomach. Now everyone wants to keep pushing forward, but when you got a chance to eat and you're subsisting off hardtack and salted pork and stream water, whatever's sizzling in that pan looks good. And so some of them start to stop. As they do stop, though, one would mark later, not talking about what happened in the afternoon, he would say, "Good gracious, what a feast we had on October 19th. Unfortunately, there was still action to be done. But Early holds up. And as he does, John Gordon comes onto the field to tell Early how great of a job he's been doing. And then one more push will destroy the Union Army here at Cedar Creek. Early greets him and says, "Well, Gordon," supposedly according to Gordon, "this is glory enough for one day." Gordon replied, "It is very well, General, but we have one more blow to strike." Early refused, and on Gordon's insistence did not change Old Jube's mind. The Georgian remarked, Gordon did, "My heart went into my boots." The Confederates could not organize an assault. They held up. This time they give the Union lines time to solidify, and on comes the scene. Coming down from Winchester is Philip Sheridan. Now, giving credit to the Union Army, the Sixth Corps, other elements had started to reform. Yes, there were men floating from the battle line heading back to Winchester. There's not an engagement in the Civil War where there's not men leaving the battlefront. But Sheridan makes this ride, yelling, "We'll whip them yet. We shall sleep in our old quarters tonight." Supposedly, George Custer is so happy of seeing Sheridan, he rides in from the flank, jumps off his horse, and gives Sheridan a kiss on the cheek. This all makes a great story afterwards, and I think someone wrote a poem about it, Sheridan's ride. What happens, though, as they push through, for a time, though, the Union Army is unsuccessful. The Stonewall's old soldiers held. But unfortunately, what became their kryptonite was the Union cavalry. And around the left flank of the Confederate Army, some Union cavalry do appear. And one of the most fateful things to yell in an infantry line is, "Our line is flanked." It's like going to an elevator today and yelling fire. Well, everyone wants to go. And that's exactly what the Confederate infantry do. They retreat out. As they do, along the high water mark of the Confederate advance, Stephen Dodson Ramseur climbs up to a third horse of that day, turns to talk to a staff officer, and when he does, a bullet enters in through his left side and comes out his right, perforates both lungs. He falls mortally wounded. They put him in a wagon and head south. He tells the wagon master not to tell anybody who is in the wagon. They get to the banks of Cedar Creek, and there's a bottleneck over the bridge. Union cavalry swoop in and start to question who's in the wagon. The wagon master follows his job. Says, "The general won't let me tell you who's in there." Stephen Ramseur is captured and brought back to Belle Grove. He was a West Point officer. He will die in the room all the way to the right, the front room, the next morning. On his bedside is some of his fellow officers, including George Custer and one of the DuPonts who had served with Ramseur at West Point. Ramseur will never know if he's the father of a boy or a girl. The Confederate Army retreats back through. This is the last action of the Confederate Army, or of the Second Corps in the valley. They are pulled out. Early will, of course, have an action in spring at Waynesboro, but the Confederate Second Corps will head back to the siege of Petersburg and Richmond. They will then march, of course, out along the Appomattox campaign. One soldier was glad that they were out early and back to the rank and file, back under Lee. He said, "No further glory to the old Second Corps could ever be under its present leader, Early." But thousands of comrades did not make that march out to Appomattox. The Second Corps, Jackson's former command, had gone to hell to fight the Yankees. That hell continued 5 months after the turning of the calendar. On May 5th, as I said, 18,919 soldiers, including these three gentlemen, marched toward the wilderness. On April 9th, 1865, 5,036 men of the Second Corps received their paroles at Appomattox. 339 days later. Now, being a historian, I usually use a calculator for any math, but figuring this up, this is simple math. That was 13,883 casualties. So I decided to test my math skills a little farther. That is approximately 41 men every day was killed or wounded or captured in the Second Corps. This is what the Second Corps' command structure looked like at the end. All four names are different from when the command structure happened 339 days prior. These are some of the casualties suffered at various places. This is the monument to Ramseur. These are the monuments we have of the sacrifice and valor of these men. Here's what they lost in the valley. Here's some of the faces, the simple faces, the rank and file, the men who marched after those leaders and fought with those leaders. They folded into history. But in 1864, they did as much as they could to file Old Baldhead and Lee's bad old man for one more chance at victory. Thank you. The question, compare and contrast Early and Ewell. Both, Ewell was a great division commander. Ewell could have been a great corps commander. Ewell was used to orders under Jackson that were explicit. Lee's command style was a little different. Ewell had really never served with Lee up until after 1863 when he comes back as corps commander, because he is wounded, at Groveton during the initial part of the Second Manassas campaign. So he doesn't have Jackson above him to issue those explicit orders. So he does have the 3rd Winchester. He plans a perfect engagement and envelopment. Yeah, I mean, it is Robert Milroy, and we can test to how good his military prowess is. But he does, the prudent thing here at Gettysburg, maybe hold up. He doesn't know exactly what's up ahead. He's always blamed for this one instance. So he has good days, he has bad days. Now, he is, and it's no fault of his own, he has a very strong-willed wife who makes life under his encampment not good in late 63. But he, unfortunately, the rigors of campaign, having the leg amputated, suffering from various elements. He just, unfortunately, the campaign chews up in 1864 a lot of men, and Ewell's one of them. Early is a poor man's version of Jackson. He will fight. He doesn't care what he says. He doesn't care what opinions you have of him. He's already irascible. You can't blame him. He's suffering rheumatism. He had a permanent scowl on his face, but he comes very close. Cedar Creek is very close to changing the Shenandoah Valley campaign. So he has great days like that now. At Fisher's Hill, he doesn't explain why he puts his cavalry on the weak left flank. But after the war, he's doing as much as he can to explain and promote, of course, the lost cause. But both of them have great days. Early is in 64. If you look at the 3 corps commanders that Lee has at Cold Harbor, A.P. Hill is sick. Anderson is not the offensive-minded genius, so Early's the only guy he has left that has the same mindset as Lee. Unfortunately, he faces Philip Sheridan. He faces overpowering numbers, and like Lee, war is a product of attrition, a product of numbers. Early has a great campaign. Unfortunately, he just is not perfect. So I hope that, both have good days. Both are stable commanders. We kind of pinpoint their negative days a little more than their positive days. Oh. Yes, sir.
Why doesn't Early accompany the Second Corps back to Richmond?
Why doesn't Early accompany the Second Corps back to Richmond? Because Lee has a delicate position. The Second Corps has lost trust in Early. Lee can't tell Early that because Lee still has a high opinion of Early. But the Second Corps, Early had also made the mistake of going publicly and putting a thing in the paper espousing that if someone would have held truer to their colors, things might have been different. Second Corps had lost trust. John Gordon had lost trust, other ones. And so Lee's ability, instead of trying to come down on Early and castigating him, he keeps him in the valley, saying, hey, I need you in the valley. So I need the Second Corps back. And then he gets the death knell, and after the Battle of Waynesboro, I'd like to assign you to a place, but I don't have any places to put you, so await further orders. So it is a trust. He had lost the trust. He lost the respect of the Second Corps because of what happened at Cedar Creek and the reverses. So Lee has a delicate position and keeps Early out in the valley, brings the Second Corps back. That's it. All right, thank you.